Hi everyone, this is Jim with JP Reacts, where you come to see a former candidate talk about what politicians mean by what they say and sometimes what they don't say. Today we're going to cover something a little bit different. Today is actually Inauguration Day for President Biden, so it's a big day in politics, and this is probably going to be going out on Friday. But what I wanted to cover today was H.R. 1. It's the first bill out of Congress and it covers the voting and elections security and all that good stuff. There's no video on this one, so I'm going to have to just go through the fact sheet with you guys together, but hopefully you're into that, so I'll see you around after this. Okay, welcome back. So basically we're just going to go through it line by line so we can see what's in this bill and if we think it's a good idea. I don't know how long this is going to take or if it's going to have multiple parts, but we'll see where we get when we get there, okay? So starting off, the first part of the bill, which I will link to below, starts off with the election access. It starts off with voter registration modernization, so it requires each state to make available online voter registration, correction, cancellation, and designation of party affiliation. So basically, a lot of states still don't have online voter registration, so this will definitely help them get that in order. Also, not every state makes you declare a party. I know I live in Illinois, you don't necessarily need to declare a party on your registration, but during the primaries is when you can only pick either a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot or any of the other independent parties. So not every state has that, but we'll modernize it so it moves it online. It's going to prohibit states from requiring applicants to provide more than the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. This is kind of a big deal for privacy because there's a lot of what do you call it? Where they steal identities in this age and time, and a lot of people are unwilling or uncomfortable with providing their full Social Security number because of that. So this will help protect their privacy. The next one requires the chief state election official to automatically register to vote any eligible unregistered citizens while protecting from prosecution in eligible voters mistakenly registered. Deem state agencies and federal offices within a state as contributing agencies for the purposes of registration. So basically what this says is it's automatic voter registration. It's going to use existing databases to help get people registered. For most people, Department of Motor Vehicles, some other agencies collect a lot of information, and it's basically going to make everybody automatically registered to vote. That's the idea, is to help limit how many different steps are going into it to make sure that everybody can get registered and is able to vote. The second part about making sure that people aren't prosecuted for being mistakenly registered in the wrong jurisdiction. So if you move, you might not necessarily remember to change your voter registration, or maybe you thought you were registered in one location, but you should have been registered in a different. So it's basically for honest mistakes without intent to deceive is basically what the process is here. So that's what they're talking about in that situation. And then state election officials, what they're talking, it could be, a lot of states have Secretary of States that run elections, and that's an elected position that does it. Some states also have a Board of Elections. In Illinois, we have a Board of Elections that handles all of elections, so it would be at whichever party runs the elections in each state would be the one that's required to organize this and make this happen. Next, you got require a state to permit voters to register on the day of a federal election, including during early voting. So that's also known as same-day registration. So basically, if you're not registered on the day of the election, which includes any early voting for any part of the election, you can register at the voting booth. A lot of states already have this, and it really helps encourage more participation in the process, which is the goal for everybody, to have more people vote. Next, you got limits the authority of states to remove registrants from the official list of eligible voters in elections for federal office in the state based on interstate voter registration cross-checks. That's a mouthful, but basically that is, you probably heard of voter purges in the news, and this is what it's referring to. There's a system of cross-checks or whatnot, and that cannot be the sole reason why somebody is eliminated and unregistered to vote in the state. There needs to be additional checks made to make sure that the person actually moved or not, which is usually why that cross-check with other states happens. Next is require states to provide annual reports on voter registration statistics to the Election Assistance Commission. So basically, it just what it says. Each state's going to be required to say what percentage of eligible voters are registered in their state on a routine basis. Provides HAVA funds to implement the voter registration modernization reform. So basically, it's providing funding for this. Makes it unlawful to interfere or prevent an individual from registering to vote, instructs the EAC to develop best practices for states to deter and prevent such violations. So makes it illegal basically to stop people from registering if they're legally allowed to register. Next is access to voting for individuals with disabilities. So requires the states to promote access to voter registration and voting for persons with disabilities. And then it gives them money to implement that so that people with disabilities have just as easy time to vote as people without. Next subtitle in this is prohibiting voter caging. Voter caging is when agency or a party sends a bunch of unsolicited mail out to the public, and anything that's returned is sent to the election official saying, hey, this person doesn't live at this address, you need to unregister them. It's not a good use of time, and when they're using it as the sole purpose of unregistering them, it's not fair to the voter. They could have been out of town at the time. They saw it as unsolicited mail and just return to sender. There's all kinds of reasons why it could have just been a mistake by the post office on where to send it to. So there's all kinds of reasons why. So that's why caging is not good for getting more people to vote. It makes it harder and makes it voting uncertain because a lot of people don't know if they're eligible. Next one is prohibiting deceptive practices and preventing voter intimidation. It prohibits providing false information about elections to hinder or discourage voting, and increases penalties for voter intimidation. It gives sentencing guidelines for those things. Basically, there has been in the news the last couple cycles that there have been auto phone calls saying the election has been moved or the election day has changed, and it's targeting certain voters. So that's going to make it's illegal already, but it sounds like it's going to make it a federal offense and increase some penalties on those types of things. Voter intimidation is like showing up to the polls and trying to stop people from voting by intimidating them in some way, and sometimes just the presence of people that look intimidating is enough to be intimidating to voters, depending on their situation. Next is democracy restoration. Declares the right of citizens to vote in federal elections will not be denied because of a criminal conviction unless a citizen is serving a felony sentence in a correctional facility. Requires states and federal government to notify individuals convicted of state or federal felonies respectively of their re-enfranchisement. So basically, once somebody has served their full sentence, they are required by law now, they would be if this passed, to be eligible to vote, regardless of what it is. They served their sentence, they're out and back out in the public, they're eligible to vote. And this also says that it's up to the federal government or the state government, depending on what crime it was, to tell these people that are ex felons that they are eligible to vote, to notify them. This next part is promoting accuracy and integrity and security through voter verified permanent paper ballot. Requires states to use individual durable voter verified paper ballots, and that said ballots are counted by hand or an optical character recognition device provided the voter an opportunity to correct the ballot should a mistake be made, and requires that ballots are not preserved in any manner that makes it possible to associate a voter to the ballot. So basically this is requiring that there's paper ballots on all federal elections, and that you can't trace a specific vote to a specific voter. Privacy at the ballot booth has always been a norm of American politics, so this will definitely help ensure that that happens, and also allow for a way to trace election counts throughout the system so that we can make sure that vote counts are accurate and aren't being changed by computer or whatnot. Next is provisional ballots. Basically requires that provisional ballots from eligible voters at incorrect polling places be counted. So it's making sure that if they went to the wrong polling location, that their votes still count, but it will only count for the overlap of the elections. So for example, if I went to the wrong polling location and I voted for president, vice president, senator, and congressperson, we'll just put those out there, but the polling location I went to, my congressperson wasn't on that ballot, my votes for president, vice president, governor, senator, since those are statewide or federal, that cover the whole jurisdiction, those would count, just not the vote that wouldn't have counted from that place, if that makes sense. Next section is early voting. Early voting requires at least 15 consecutive days of early voting for federal elections. Requires that early voting locations be near public transportation in rural areas and open for at least 10 hours per day. And it also requires them to be open at some times prior to 9 and after 5 on at least a certain number of days. So basically this is just saying that early voting for federal elections is required. It needs to happen 15 days prior to election, and needs to be in both rural areas and city areas to be able to allow people to vote early. Voting by mail prohibits a state from imposing restrictions on an individual's ability to vote by mail. This was a big thing in this past election. Obviously with COVID, you wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to vote safely, and voting by mail was the safest option available. Requires states to carry out a program to track and confirm receipt of absentee ballots, and makes this information available to the voter who cast the ballot. This is basically ballot tracing. In my state, you were able to see online if your ballot was received and if it was accepted. That's what they're talking about here. Requires prepayment of postage on return envelopes of voting materials, which includes any voter registration forms. So basically, it eliminates the need for the voter to provide postage. The return envelope will have postage prepaid. Absent uniformed services voters and overseas voters requires states to send absentee ballots at least 45 days prior to an election, and allows for a civil penalty for failure. What that means is if somebody that's overseas, either in the military or just an overseas citizen, did not get their ballot between 45 days early, it means that they can sue the state for failure to do so. And then it requires the electronic transmission of blank absentee ballots, so it allows them to send just blank absentee ballots that can be printed out on location, as opposed to having to mail out and then get them sent back. On certain cases, I'm sure there's a listing of what those cases are. Poll worker recruitment and training requires the EAC to develop model training programs and award grants, so provide better training for poll workers. Enhancement of Enforcement. Enhancement of Enforcement allows individual private rights of action and ability to file administrative complaints. Basically, it allows individuals to file complaints where in the past they had to be campaigns. Federal election integrity prohibits state chief election officers from participating in federal campaigns. So basically that means if, for example, a Secretary of State that's administering an election, that person cannot also be a candidate for federal office in that election that he or she is running in. Perhaps, which makes sense, right? Because you don't want, they have a conflict of interest. They're supposed to be in charge of counting the ballots, and they're counting ballots of an election that they're in, right? Doesn't make sense. Prohibits using official authorities to affect the results of elections. So basically using police officers or any other state or local or national authority to impact the results of the election. Next, we got voter access. So it treats universities as voter registration agencies. So basically allows universities to register voters. Requires states to notify an individual no later than 7 days before an election if the individual polling place has changed. So there's times when polling places changed and voters weren't notified. This tells them that they have to notify them. Requires states to allow voters to sign sworn affidavits to vote in lieu of presenting photo ID. So basically this says that they not requiring photo ID for federal elections. You can sign a sworn affidavit just like you would on many other things. Provides accommodations for voters residing in Indian lands. A lot of Native Americans don't have individual addresses, so this will allow them to use a communal address for voting purposes. Ensures equitable and efficient operation of polling places, reducing long lines and wait times. So long lines, I've talked about in many different videos, is a stain on our elections. So this is providing additional money to help lessen that and hopefully get that out of our system. Requires states to provide secure drop boxes for voting absentee ballots in elections for federal offices. So that's for vote by mail or absentee. So you don't have to put it in the mail, you can just put it in a drop box, which is what I actually did in this last election. I didn't put it in the mail. I put it in an official drop box that was near my home. Prohibits states from restricting curbside voting. That was similar to the drop box idea. There was places where you could just drop off your ballot without having to actually get out of your car. So as long as that's taken care of. Imposes requirements for federal election contingency plans in response to natural disasters. So basically putting together a plan for if there's a natural disaster like a hurricane, like happened in New York in 2012, making sure there's a plan in place and the procedures are laid out. Clarifies the absentee ballot shall be carried expeditiously and free of postage, and allows states to use Help America Vote funds to make sure that happens. We talked about that already. I'm just going to finish out this section. This is getting long already. Requires the Attorney General to develop a state-based response system and hotline that provides information to voting. Basically tells the Attorney General in each state to create a system where voters can call in and get the information they need about voting. Reauthorize election assistance. So basically reauthorizes that commission that we've been talking about. Amends the National Voter Registration Act of '93 to include the Marianas Islands, which is an island group in the Pacific, and clarifies that if any, then basically this last section says if any part of this is deemed unconstitutional, it doesn't make the whole thing unconstitutional. Each part is separate. So that's the first part of the new HR1, which is the Voting Assistance Act and Election Integrity Act. I think it's called For the People or something like that. Hopefully you got something out of this. This is a new system for me. If you did, please like this video below. And of the parts we just covered, which one are you most excited about being rolled out to the public? For me, it's the ability for mail-in voting to be easier and registration to be easier personally. So put that comment below. Until I see you next time around the internet, you have a great day. Bye.